I'm filming okay. It has been 6 months since the United States withdrew from Afghanistan, and now tens of thousands of Afghans are trying to do the same. Let me give you an idea of how slow the application process is. So since last July, 170 people have been given permission to relocate to the United States, but 43,000 have applied. So today on the stream, we ask, is the US doing enough to help Afghans seeking refuge? Joining our discussion, leading our discussion, Halima, Sadiqa, Layla, thank you so much for being on the stream today, sharing your thoughts and your insights. Halima, welcome. Please introduce yourself to our global audience.
Thank you so much for having me. My name is Halima Wali. I'm based out of New York City. I'm a community organizer and a co-founder of Afghans for a Better Tomorrow, which is an advocacy group based in the United States.
Good to have you. Hello, Sadiqa. Please introduce yourself to the stream audience. Tell them who you are and what you do.
Hello, thank you for having me. My name is Sadiqa Fahimi. I am a Fulbright scholar, and I was a woman activist in Afghanistan and evacuated from Afghanistan. And right now I'm working with a nonprofit organization based in Washington, D.C.
Thank you very much for being on the stream today. And Layla, welcome. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, thank you. My name is Layla Ayub. I am an immigration lawyer and an Afghan-American organizer with Project Anar, which assists Afghans seeking humanitarian parole to come to the United States.
All right, so you've met our guest audience. If you're on YouTube right now, what comments or questions do you have? I will do my very best to wrap them into the show. Just put them right here in the comments section. Sadiqa, I'm just thinking about that bureaucratic process of applying to move to the United States. If you could describe it or sum it up, what would you tell us?
It is a very difficult process, but the difficulty right now, it is not only the process itself, the application, but the challenge is right now for those who are still in Afghanistan is the third country, the one that's like when your application is eligible. So if I sum up, it will be you apply. First of all, you have to find a sponsor, and you fill out all the forms. So Layla might be a better person who tell the name of the forms. And you fill out all those forms, and you find the sponsor who will fill the forms and write the letter for you that they will support you. And the same time you apply, if you have the money, you have to apply, pay the $575. If not, you apply for fee waiver, which is a very big reason that a lot of applications are getting rejected. And at the same time, you apply these. If your address is based in Afghanistan, the first time they will get rejected. They will not look at the application at all. They will just reject it because you are not in the third country, which itself is a huge challenge, because if those people who go to the third country and their application is still get rejected, what will happen to them that time? So that is the process right now.
Okay, my head is spinning just listening to that very brief description. This whole process, Layla, is known as humanitarian parole. What does that mean?
Yeah. So parole refers to a really wide discretion that the government has to admit people to come here. It doesn't lead to a permanent status, and it's really a way for someone who otherwise wouldn't have a pathway to enter the United States to have permission to get here. And it is a huge discretion. The US paroles people when they arrive at an airport, for example, and they really don't have to complete these applications to get paroled into the US. But they have done this, they've completed these applications, and the US has the discretion to approve them so that if they are refugees, for example, they don't really have a viable pathway because of how backlogged and slow and eroded the refugee process is. They could ask for parole and get to the United States and then ask for asylum once they're here.
So it's like an emergency. It's like an emergency measure. It's like I don't have a visa. I really need to get out of Afghanistan or the third country that I've gone to in order to get to the US. This is an emergency measure. That is incredibly slow right now. Plus, you need money. I heard Sadiqa, you mentioning the money. When this is a family, that money adds up. Halima, help us understand. How much money do you need to even just put in your application?
Well, it's $575 per person per application. And so let's say you have a family of 10, that immediately adds up. That's $575 per person for those 10 people. And so I had actually sponsored a family in Afghanistan. It's actually my uncle, and it's a family of 10. Thankfully, we were able to get financial assistance through the Afghan community that's been fundraising money. Actually, Laila's group, Project Anar, has been fundraising money in order to cover the cost of these. I think one thing to understand is that a lot of folks in Afghanistan, they survive on less than $575 for the entire month for a family of 10. And so this is definitely an economic barrier for a lot of Afghans to be able to apply. And like Sadiqa was just mentioning, oftentimes because of the economic situation of Afghans in Afghanistan, and perhaps of their sponsor in the United States not able to afford it, going down the path of a waiver, but that's just additional process time as well. And so what we're seeing is that these economic challenges really ends up hurting Afghans who are trying to apply for this humanitarian parole.
And I'll just add to that. We don't want to ask our community to put all of their resources into this when we're trying to help Afghans who are still in Afghanistan and need money to make ends meet. We need to support arriving Afghans who are in a vulnerable position here as they resettle. And, there's many folks, I'll let Sadiqa speak to this herself, but there's many Afghans who arrived in recent months and they have their families that they're trying to get here. And we cannot tell them it's a good idea to spend this much money on all of these applications to try to get their family here when we don't know what the government is going to do with them. And really, we know that they're not using their discretion as generously as they could be.
Yeah.
Yeah, you go ahead, Sadiqa. Go ahead.
I can jump. I can add to Leila's point. I mean, that's only that many. After August 2021, it's the families some families all over around the world, and some part of them are still in Afghanistan, some part of them are in Islamabad, some of them are Rwanda, some of them here in the United States. Those families need to reunite, but there's the challenge of. I hope that it is only the challenge of $575. You pay that, it's okay, I will pay that, but your family their application will not accept it, and you need to spend more money to get them to the third country. For example, I'm working on a case that they are still in Kabul, and I found a pro bono attorney who is helping with that. But she's not submitting the application because the government will not look to the application. Even if we pay all this money, they will not look at it because that address is Kabul. So you have to be in Islamabad. You have to be somewhere, not Tehran, somewhere that is like there is an embassy, U.S. embassy. So that needs a lot of money too, getting outside the country, applying for a visa to third country, getting a flight, living in another country, you cannot work. Those all need financial help, and you cannot afford that as an Afghan family.
You know what, I'm thinking, Sadiqa, it means that only certain people are going to be able to afford to apply and maybe relocate. And if you don't have the means, you could end up like there were two people in Kabul recently speaking to news teams about their dire economic situation, just so that we're framing this in what is happening in Afghanistan today. Take a look.
The difference we see in these 6 months since the Taliban seized power is that there is no work at all. Items are plentiful, but not jobs. Before the past 6 months, people had jobs, and the work situation was quite good. But now poverty and hunger have increased.
The situation has affected us a lot because previously people had income, they had jobs. People have lost their jobs and their incomes have been cut off. Now, about 95% of the people are in need of bread, day and night. That is why previously, if we used up 3 to 4 sacks of flour, now we don't even use up 1.5.
So we already understand how tricky it is to just put in an application. You cannot even be in Kabul or anywhere in Afghanistan. You have to be in a third country. It is going to cost you per family member $575. And then you make your application and then everything slows down. Earlier, we spoke to the US Citizenship and Immigration Services Department. So we were communicating with them. They sent us a very, very long statement. This is a little bit that we picked out. They were explaining why this process is taking so long. In a typical year, the USCIS receives fewer than 2,000 requests for humanitarian parole overall from all nationalities. Of those requests, approximately 500 to 700 are approved in a typical year. All right, so it's not easy to apply in a normal year. And then that figure, do you remember I mentioned it right at the beginning? 43,000 Afghans applied between last July and now, and 170 have been given approval to relocate. Halima, this is a bureaucratic nightmare. What would you say to the USCIS right now about how can they improve this situation? Because it's really not working.
Yeah, and I think one thing to note, I think noteworthy for the audience to recognize is that back in August, when Afghanistan was essentially falling to the Taliban, one of the things that we were told by government officials was to essentially apply for humanitarian parole. We knew, and the Biden administration knew, that the refugee program, the SIV program, which is the special immigrant visa program, had all been essentially deteriorated by the previous president, President Trump. And so humanitarian parole was seen as sort of this outside of the box almost solution to, get the most vulnerable Afghans outside of the country. Unfortunately, it hasn't necessarily played out like that. One of the things that a lot of Afghan organizers in the United States was pushing for was to drop the $575 application fee. And this is as early as, end of August, September. Unfortunately, USCIS and the Biden administration didn't budge on that. And so we see that fee to this day. I think Project Anar and Lila can probably chime in on this. It's estimated that USCIS is going to make $17 million, give or take, of a profit off of these applications. That's a lot of money. And in the meantime, they're giving more so denials than there are approvals. And so, unfortunately, it's just a situation where we're trying to get more transparency around why these denials are happening. When I received the denials from my own family, 8 out of 10 have been denied. And the information that USCIS sent in terms of the reasoning for the denial was very vague and basically said, there wasn't enough supporting evidence, despite providing a lot of documentation with each application in terms of why my family was at risk, why they needed to leave the country, but it wasn't enough. And so for me, at least, it's very interesting because the reason for the United States to start a war in 2001 was for, the Taliban being a violent group, the Taliban being an oppressive group. Unfortunately, those same reasons that Afghans are saying is a real grave threat to their well-being on these humanitarian parole applications is suddenly not good enough to grant them humanitarian parole. So it's quite the, catch-22 that a lot of Afghans are facing.
All right, so the Citizenship and Immigration Service told us in their statement that 1,500 people have been denied so far. I have so many questions for you, guests, from YouTube. I'm going to ask you to respond very quickly so that we can get through as many as possible. They're really interested in what you have to say. So Akor says, and I'm going to give this one to you, Sadiqa, the US has failed the people of Afghanistan due to its rushed decision to withdraw troops from that country, leaving it under the rule of the Taliban. Let the USA accept refugees to enter the United States. You say what to that comment, Sadiqa?
I'm sorry, I missed it. Could you repeat what was the exact comment?
I'm going to share it with Layla. Layla, did you hear that? I'll come back to you, Sadiqa, with another thought, because it was a very long question. Layla, go ahead. Let refugees come to the US. Just let them come.
Yeah. So, you know, even in that statement from USCIS, we hear from the government how they didn't expect this number of applications, right? All of these things are direct consequences of decades of US foreign policy towards Afghans. They knew that there were going to be Afghan refugees. It's been years that immigration advocates have been putting out recommendations to the government on how to address the issues with the refugee process. And specifically in the last year, directly related to Afghanistan foreign policy, when the withdrawal was announced under the previous administration, immigration advocates, Afghans, have been telling the government that people were going to have to resort to parole. So these are all, like the current situation that Afghans are facing is known and expected. And the fact that the government can say, oh, you know, this is so many applications, this is so much more than what we get in a normal year, it's just reflective of how they treat Afghans as, you know, easily disposable, honestly. Like they didn't invest enough resources up front. And now there are so many solutions laid out to them. We've all been recommending to them to use their discretion widely, to grant these applications, to waive the fees, to create a special parole program for Afghans that can address the shortcomings of the refugee process and address the limits of the existing humanitarian parole process. And it's really up to them now to respond to that and to create a better way to process Afghans. And honestly, they, like Halima mentioned, they have all this money now from all of these application fees. They have allocated triple or quadruple the number of staff to reviewing these applications. So we just need to make sure that they're not using all of those resources to deny entry to Afghans.
Ooh, okay, all right. So Sadiqa, I have one more question for you. This comes from our community watching right now. Do you feel let down by the US and the West?
As a woman, as a minority group member, yes. You know, when in 2001 or 2002, when the US came to Afghanistan, they say that the war is women's right war, and we are coming to do it. Like right now, look at schools are closed for girls, you know, over the class of 6. Or women are, you know, do not have to their, you know, rights, freedom of speech. Women cannot work. Women, you know, look at Afghanistan. You can see all the reports from Afghanistan. What's happening to the soldiers, former soldiers who fight beside all American soldiers, and nobody is saying it. And it's like when I see all those news of what's happening, how the Taliban are torturing, taking the women's, taking the former soldiers, my heart aches, and it's too much. Yes, as a woman, as a minority group, yes, Western countries, US let us down.
I want to bring in one more point here, because you made it very clear, Guess, that humanitarian parole was the first step. It's not the end of being a secure Afghan in the United States, wherever you relocate. It's just the first step. Earlier we spoke to Stephen, who told us what the next step should be. Have a listen to him, and then Halima, will you respond off the back of Stephen's comment? Here he is.
Even if Afghans get to the United States somehow, they need to figure out how to stay here permanently. Asylum is one way, but they need to show that they have an individualized, well-founded fear of persecution. That can take a long time as well. What Congress really needs to do is to pass a bill to allow all Afghans at risk to be able to stay in the United States permanently. We've done that in the past with other groups like Vietnamese, and we should do it now as well.
Yeah, so I agree with that statement. One of the things that Afghan organizers and activists have been pushing for is the Afghan Adjustment Act. And so there's two things. One is the Afghan Adjustment Act, and then there's also something that is called TPS, or the Temporary Protective Status, which I think Laila can also expand upon. But what we're essentially trying to do is, for the Afghans that have entered the country on parole, they don't have a pathway to legal status. And so what we would like and would hope for this to essentially do is that they should be given a chance to have some sort of pathway either to legal residency or to citizenship. We know that the situation in Afghanistan is detrimental. We know that there's a lot of violence at the hands of the Taliban. And so the very last thing that we want to see is for these very traumatized, newly arrived Afghan refugees in the United States to, down the line, 6 months from now, 8 months from now, be picked up by ICE and be detained and then, God forbid, deported. And so these are some of the things that, we've been pushing for as a community. It's only, up to the Biden administration and really up to Congress to be able to, pass this and make sure that Afghans who do come here are safe and are able to stay here long term and have some sort of pathway to either legal residency or to citizenship.
I'm just looking here at my laptop that there is a movement amongst lawmakers to acknowledge the responsibility of the United States when it comes to Afghans and making sure that they are safe if they want to come to the United States. I have a look here on my laptop. What I am thinking, Laila, is probably what are you saying to the families who you are trying to help get humanitarian parole? How do you help them? What are you saying to them that they need to do other than having $575 each to put their application in? How are you helping them? If they're watching right now, what would you say around the world?
Yeah. Well, we do have to explain the realities that it is a very difficult process. And there's a lot of advocacy happening, but we don't know how long it would take, even if someone gets an approval, for them to be able to eventually get to the U.S. We've heard stories of people who have approvals who are in a third country. These are approvals from earlier in the summer. They're in a third country already, and they still haven't been able to get here. So really, we have to explain that reality to people. But also, we just keep telling everyone to do their best to try to keep some sort of documentation of what's happening right now. And that way, if they do apply for humanitarian parole, they can have a strong application. These applications are being treated at a really difficult threshold to meet, and it's important to have strong evidence of any threat someone might be facing. And that's also going to be important if they have to apply for asylum down the line. Okay. And a lot of us are also assisting families that might already have some family members in the U.S. and doing what we can to help them. If someone recently arrived and they're trying to get their family here at the same time as they're pursuing humanitarian parole, they should be pursuing their own immigration case, because if they get permanent status here, then it might be a lot easier for them to bring their family at that point.
Oh my goodness, what a challenge. Laila, Siddiqa, Halima, thank you so much. The reason I'm turned around this way is because I want you to have a look on my laptop so you can follow all of our guests online. This is Laila on Twitter, Siddiqa on Twitter, and Halima. That's her Twitter account as well. Thank you for your comments, your questions if you've been following on YouTube. And I really appreciate you guests for being part of our show, giving us some insight into a story that made huge news 6 months ago. But we still have to remember the thousands and thousands, actually millions of Afghans who are not safe to this very day. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Take care.